pleasure.
Such a wonderful, comprehensive in-service on hemophilia, and he said, "Oh, I can do IVIG," and so of course he said, "Of course."
Good.
So here he is.
Very, very happy to be here, folks. Thanks
Great.
for the invitation back.
Oh, get a handout and a.
Oh yeah, because this one is for
This is for
continuing
CEs.
education. Correct. Good stuff. Fill out all the forms you need to. And you received an envelope and
Yeah,
to send everything back to the...
I didn't receive the envelope, but it says please phone.
You all set that?
I did not receive an envelope sent back.
No, but you have an address. So maybe Jeff should send this stuff back. Usually we give you an address.
Okay, I'll check with Jeff then.
So this morning I've been asked to come out and talk to you folks about intravenous immunoglobulin. And I'll be talking to you about the manufacture of this product and also the wide and varied clinical use that this product is made use of. So to begin then, I'll describe in general terms what intravenous immunoglobulins are. As I'll describe to you, these products known as IGIV, intravenous immunoglobulins are antibody concentrates. When we manufacture an intravenous immunoglobulin, what we do is we purify the antibodies, the immune system proteins, from the plasma of upwards of 60,000 healthy individuals. Antibody proteins are proteins made by the cells of the immune system, made by the white cells, the leukocytes, that allow us to recover from infection, and the antibodies also allow us to prevent infection in the future. So what we'll do at Baxter is to capture the antibody experience of 60,000 healthy individuals and get that antibody experience into a bottle, so that now we can give this immune system experience to somebody whose own immune system doesn't work. Somebody who's been born without the cells of the immune system required to make antibodies. Someone with primary immune deficiency. You know, if you're born with primary immune deficiency, you don't have the cells that are responsible for making the antibodies. And without the antibodies, you're going to be very, very prone to infection. How do you prevent infection in a patient with primary immune deficiency? You pass along the immune system experience of all these thousands and thousands of people in the form of intravenous immunoglobulin. In the second section of my talk, I'll talk to you about how IGIVs are used around the world. We'll discuss the labeled indications for the product. In the third section of the talk, I'll describe the manufacturing process that we make use of to prepare our intravenous immunoglobulin, focusing for a couple of minutes on the viral and activation steps we take. And finally, if there's time, if you're interested in hearing it, I'll give you a short dissertation on the use of IGIV in cancer patients, particularly in patients with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, multiple myeloma, and kids requiring bone marrow transplant. So, to begin with, intravenous immunoglobulins, or IGIVs, are antibody concentrates that we prepare from very large pools of human plasma. Now, a few points to be taken off of this first bullet. First, antibodies and immunoglobulins are the same thing. Two different words meaning almost the same thing. As I'll describe to you on the next slide, antibodies are proteins capable of binding very, very specifically to a target. By that I mean, the antibody protein that binds the staph bacterium doesn't bind strep. It bounces off of strep, but there's a different antibody to bind strep. The antibody that binds measles virus doesn't bind polio virus. Antibodies bind their targets very, very specifically. So if we know what the target of an antibody protein is, we'll call it an antibody. So for example, I'll talk about anti-measles antibody. But if we're talking about proteins whose targets we don't know, or if we're talking about a large pool of antibodies, we'll call that preparation immunoglobulin. So immunoglobulin and antibodies really just a semantic difference between the two words. These drugs are delivered, as you all well know, intravenously. It's certainly not a topical product, probably should not be administered subcutaneously or in any other fashion beyond intravenous delivery. Now these antibody proteins have the ability to stick very, very specifically to certain targets that I may refer to as antigens. The target of an antibody is called an antigen. The antigens that we're going to want to bind in the discussion today are pathogenic microorganisms. We'll be talking about antibodies binding to the surface of bacteria, viruses, and fungus. And what we're going to want the antibodies in our intravenous immunoglobulin preparation to do is to bind these pathogenic microorganisms and kill them to prevent infection. entire focus of today's talk. It's helpful for me if you understand the structure of antibody molecules in sort of basic form. Antibodies are 4-chain proteins made by the cells of the immune system called the B lymphocyte. B as in boy. The B lymphocyte or the B cell produces the antibody molecules. Again, antibodies have 4-chain structure. There's 1 chain, there's 2, there's a 3rd chain, and there's a 4th chain. And in the groove between these 2 chains and the groove between these 2 chains, the antibody will bind its target very, very specifically. Let me give you an example. If I wanted to make an antibody to this cup, one of the protein chains would look like this. The other protein chain looks like that. And look, I have a perfect anti-cup antibody. Very, very, very tight binding. Very, very tight binding. The cup cannot fall out of this groove. And why is the cup bound by this antibody? Because of the shape of the antibody groove, which looks like this. And the cup just fits in there perfectly. There's 1 chain, there's another chain, anti-cup antibody. Does this antibody bind my pointer? No. The pointer falls right out. The groove is too big to bind the pointer. The antibody that binds the pointer is long and narrow. It looks like this. Does this antibody bind the cup? No. Why? Wrong size, wrong shape. Antibodies bind very, very specifically to their targets because of the shape of the antibody binding groove. So the antibody that binds staph doesn't bind strep. There's another antibody that binds strep. Antibodies are symmetrical down the middle, which means that whatever is bound in this antibody binding groove is bound here as well. Identical target specificity on both sides. Antibodies bind their targets specifically. Now, after that explanation, you may consider that the top end of the antibody molecule is the business end. But I'm here to tell you, folks, that the business end of the antibody molecule is the back region, back here. And this is called the Fc region. And here's why I consider this the business end of the antibody. Because once an antibody has bound specifically to its target, the antibody binding group, and remember what the targets are, bacteria, viruses, and fungus. Once these targets have been bound by the antibody molecule up here, the Fc region changes its shape. So now, this antibody molecule, the changed Fc region, has the ability to kick in 2 extra functions of the immune system. The first thing that happens is cells called macrophage become activated. Macrophage are cells that carry out or white blood cells, that carry out the process called phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is a compound word. It means cells that eat. Macrophage are the cells you saw in the little film strip in 7th grade, where the cell would swarm and engulf a target, pull that target into the interior of the cell for its destruction. What happens really is that macrophage are attracted to antibody-coated particles. Macrophages are attracted to antibody-coated bacteria, antibody-coated virus, antibody-coated fungus, because the macrophage has on its surface a little protein called the Fc receptor. And once an antibody has bound to, in this example, a bacterium specifically, the back end of the Fc region changes its shape so that now the back end of the antibody molecule, the Fc region, will stick to the Fc receptor on the surface of the macrophage. And that's why macrophages are attracted to antibody-coated targets. You coat the bacterial target with antibody, and now it becomes very palatable, very attractive to a macrophage, which has the ability to bind the back end of that antibody molecule. The antibody actually forms a little bridge between the macrophage and the bacterium that we're going to kill. So these macrophages, another compound word, meaning big eaters, these macrophages send out what are called pseudopods, false feet. The macrophage swarms and engulfs the antibody-coated target, surrounds it, and pulls the antibody-coated target into the interior of the macrophage, in what is called a vacuole. What happens then is that the macrophage activates granules, and all kinds of toxic chemicals are poured onto whatever was taken up by the macrophage. So lysozyme, hydrogen peroxide, trypsin, other chemicals are poured onto the bacterial target to not just kill the target, but chop it up into very fine fragments for presentation to the immune system. you want a really dynamite lecture out of me, invite me back for immunology. Got that? Macrophage only engulf antibody-coated targets. Bacteria may be taken up by macrophage phagocytosis in the absence of antibody, but it's really slow. And you know, when it comes to the immune system, and whether you get infected or not, it's all a numbers game. Do the bacteria rise in numbers faster than the cells of the immune system do? If so, you're infected. Let's keep in mind what we're talking about here. This is not a talk on immunology. This is a talk on intravenous immune globulin. And kids with primary immune deficiency. Kids whose own immune systems don't make the antibodies. So in the absence of antibodies, a child with PID becomes infected with bacteria. Macrophages are too slow. The uptake doesn't occur efficiently. The bacteria grow in numbers, overwhelming the cells of the immune system. The kid gets an infection. However, if you give a drug like intravenous immunoglobulin to this child with primary immune deficiency, now you're supplying the antibodies that can coat the bacteria and lead to macrophage uptake and killing. That's how you prevent infection in primary immune deficiency. You see, it's not the antibodies themselves that kill the bacteria, but it's that antibodies can coat the bacteria to identify the bacteria as a target for the macrophage. Yeah? So far, so good? All right. The FC region of an antibody molecule actually activates two biological functions, the second of which this probably doesn't show very well. Let me use my own slide instead of one I stole off the internet. This one's highly-coded bacterium or virus, of course. The second mechanism that kicks in once antibody binds its target is the activation of a series of proteins in the plasma called the complement proteins. This is complement with an E, not complement with an I, like my stress. These proteins complement the function of antibody. What I'm trying to show here on this little naive slide is a bacterium with two antibody molecules stuck specifically to the surface of the bacteria. Actually, if this was drawn to scale, the bacterium would be the size of an aircraft carrier, and the antibodies would be the size of fleas on the deck. That's the way to picture this. So antibodies truly coat the surface of the bacterium. When two antibody molecules line up next to each other like this, and their two FC regions are sticking up into space, one of the many complement proteins, called C1q, has the ability to bridge the gap between these two FC regions. C1q slides in, fits perfectly, and becomes activated. C1q turns on C1r, which turns on C1s, which turns on C4, C2, C3. They're numbered in the order in which they were discovered, not the order in which they were. 1, 4, 2, 3, complement proteins 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And when the complex known as C5 through C9, or the membrane attack complex, is formed, holes are literally punched into the antibody-coated target. Holes are punched. So the contents of the bacterium begin to leak out. The DNA leaks out, the mitochondria, all the gush inside the bacterium begins to leak out. Additionally, once the membrane attack complex is formed, water and sodium flow in, potassium flows out. You get enough potassium out, the bacterial cell is poisoned. You get enough water in, and this bacterial target will osmotically lyse. It will pop like a balloon you put too much air into. And then the macrophage will come in and clean up all the chunks. This is how antibody allows us to recover from infection or prevent infection in the future. Antibodies will stick specifically to a pathogenic target like bacteria or virus. Very, very specific bondage. And once the antibody has bound its target, the FC region, the back end of the antibody molecule, changes its shape so that now it's recognized by the FC receptor on macrophage. The macrophage performs phagocytosis and killing of the antibody-coated target. And complement is activated, which also leads to destruction of the target. This is how antibodies protect us from disease. But a child born with primary immune deficiency doesn't have the cells in his body to allow him to produce the antibodies. Thus, he's very, very prone to infection. How do we prevent infection in such a kid, such an adult? Intravenous immune globulin. Any questions so far? Just to sort of complete your education, there are actually 5 classes of antibody in the human body. The class we've talked about so far is known as IgG, immunoglobulin G. That's the classic four-chain structure. IgG is the antibody most prevalent in the body. It's present in a concentration between 600 and 1600 milligrams per deciliter. IgG is the antibody that crosses the placenta from the mom to the fetus. IgG has the ability to activate complement. A second class of antibody is IgA. IgA, as you can see, is dimeric. It looks like two of these antibody molecules stuck to each other, back to back. But IgA is special because it contains a protein called the secretory piece. IgA is the antibody that's found in mucous membranes. So when you get a cold, the antibody that's produced in your nose is of the IgA class. IgA is also the class of antibody that's produced in mother's colostrum and milk. And so when you hear that a breastfed baby picks up an additional immune component, it's the IgA class of antibody that the baby picks up. A baby's own immune system doesn't kick in until about 6 months after birth. So for the first 6 months of life, a baby is protected only by its mother's IgG, unless the baby is breastfed, in which case the baby will also pick up some IgA. Yes?
You know, I just have something interesting to say. I had a Jehovah's Witness patient, and their daughter's MS and would take the IVIG. I was at, because with blood products and stuff, and she said that it was because of this reason, because of the mother passing the antibodies on to the baby. It's something that we have. So that's how they justified it, so they could keep their spiritual belief in their daughter had.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a widespread belief. I wonder if that's a widespread belief.
You know what she said, not with everyone in their community, but just depends on what their belief system is. Yeah. That's pretty interesting.
That is interesting. The third class of antibody is a huge molecule. It's called IgM. IgM is a pentamer. It's like 5 antibody molecules stuck to each other. 10 antibody binding sites. IgM is a class of antibody that's produced very, very early on in immune responses. When you have a lot of bacteria, a lot of pathogen around, you have the ability to bind a lot of pathogen with pentameric IgM. The fourth class of antibody is called IgD. Not very much is known about that. The last class of antibody is called IgE, and that's the antibody that's involved in allergy. And I won't be talking about that issue. I really buttoned back to the immunology lectures. So, intravenous immune globulins are antibody concentrates made from large pools of human plasma. As you've seen already, you provide antibody for someone, you're providing them infectious protection against infection. So, what kind of patient would receive intravenous immune globulin? Well, a patient who's immune suppressed, due to, for example, a genetic deficit, primary immune deficiency, for example. Someone born without the ability to make the cells of the immune system that make the antibodies. Such a kid's going to be very prone to infection. In the past, these kids would generally die by age 1. They get infected with the most bizarre microorganisms you never heard of. I mean, you could be in this field forever and never hear some of the stuff that these kids would die from. It's incredible. They get everything. These days, with intravenous immunoglobulin, these kids lead a relatively normal life. Another type of patient who'd be immunosuppressed is a patient who has leukemia. A patient who has chronic lymphocytic leukemia, who has cancer in the bone marrow that affects their ability to make the B lymphocyte responsible for the production of antibodies. Such patients will make tons of B lymphocytes, but they're dysfunctional. Immunosuppressed patients receive intravenous immunoglobulin. Now, while the slide is up, let me point out to you that I generally try to call this drug IgIV, immunoglobulin intravenous, parentheses, human, is the name given to this drug by the FDA. But you also may hear it referred to as IVIG. When I worked in Baxter's renal division, we called it IVGG, intravenous gamma globulin. I've even heard it called IVIGG. These are all the same. They all mean the same thing, but they're different from IMIG, which is an intramuscular preparation of IgG, much less purified, you can give a lot less of it to the patient. Believe me, this is not a commercial message today, but in case I use the term Gammaguard SD, it's Baxter Healthcare's IVIG preparation. Okay, so let's talk about the labeled indications, that is, the approved uses of IVIG. And before I go on, just let me take a minute and explain to you what on-label is versus off-label. An indication, for example, use of intravenous immunoglobulin to protect patients with primary immune deficiency against infection is something that's granted to us. It's an approval granted to us by the FDA. In order to gain FDA approval for a particular indication, a particular use of a product, we have to generate data in 2 randomized controlled clinical trials whose results confirm each other. present those data to the FDA, and the FDA says, all right, they ask you a lot of questions, but then they say, okay, we believe your data, your product has an indication for the prevention of infection and primary immune deficiency. That's an on-label use of the product. However, physicians are allowed to practice the art and science of medicine any way they want. They can wash out, they can wash their floors with IGIV if they want to. Although these days that would be pretty costly to do it. But physicians will practice off-label uses of the product as well. Indications for our intravenous immunoglobulin are four in number. And the first, of course, is the prevention of infection in patients with primary immune deficiency. Diseases like Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome, severe combined immune deficiency, George syndrome. In primary immune deficiency, you can lack either the B lymphocyte, which makes the antibodies, or the B lymphocyte and the T lymphocyte, which upregulates immunity. Let me look at the next slide. There are two lymphocytes in the blood, the T cell and the B cell. The B cell makes the antibodies. The T cell upregulates immunity. It tells the immune system, all right, we've been invaded by bacteria, time to launch an immune response. The T cell is also responsible for killing virus-infected cells and cancer. So if a child is born with a primary immune deficiency, where they lack just the B lymphocyte, they can't make the antibodies, but they can upregulate immunity and they can kill virus. You give them IGIV, they're going to have a very smooth course. They're not going to have any difficulties at all. No restrictions, except for the hour or so per month that they have to sit in the chair to receive IGIV from you. They're going to lead a perfectly normal life. But a kid who's lacking both the B cell and the T cell is going to have a very rocky course despite receiving IGIV infusions, because they still may become infected with some viruses and bugs. So they're going to have to progress it down that course. Primary immune deficiency is the first labeled indication for IGIV. Second indication is for the prevention of infection in a disease known as chronic lymphocytic leukemia. In CLL, a patient gets cancer in the bone marrow and so can no longer produce the B lymphocyte. Actually, they make lots of B lymphocytes, but they're all dysfunctional. They can't make the antibodies that are required. This patient is very prone to infection. Upwards of 60% of patients with chronic lymphocytic leukemia don't die of the cancer. It's a chronic disease. It's long-lasting. They die of upper respiratory tract infections, with strep pneumonia or Haemophilus. How do you prevent those infections? IGIV, indicated for that use. Now, the third use of IGIV, the third labeled indication, has nothing to do with prevention of infection. It's the treatment of a disease called idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, or ITP. Idiopathic means we don't know what causes it, but I'm going to tell you what causes it, so that's not such a hot name. Thrombocytopenic. A thrombocyte is a platelet, and whenever you see penic, it means the number in the blood is too low. So in thrombocytopenia, the patient's platelet count is real low. And because of that, they bruise very easily. They become covered with purple marks on their skin. Idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura. Anybody in the room have ITP or ever had ITP? No? Turns out that patients with ITP have an autoimmune disease. What's happening is their immune system begins to recognize their own platelets as being foreign. The immune system is turned on to foreign objects. The immune system's purpose in life is to reject things that are foreign to the body. So the patient begins to recognize their own platelet as foreign. So antibodies are made against the platelets. And when an antibody-coated platelet passes through the spleen during normal circulation, there are lots of splenic macrophages there to pull the antibody-coated platelet out of the circulation. So the platelets patient count drops out overall. Starts out at 250 or 300,000 cells per microliter of blood. It may drop to 100,000, 50,000. Once you get down to 10,000 or 20,000 platelets per microliter, the patient is truly in danger of suffering a bleeding episode. Well, it turns out that we healthy individuals who do not have ITP also have... Take it back there. It turns out that we healthy individuals who don't have ITP also have the ability to make antiplatelet antibody. But we don't, because our immune systems produce a second antibody, a regulatory antibody, that goes by the name of anti-idiotype. No reflection on the speaker. Anti-idiotypic antibodies are regulatory antibodies, second antibodies that shut off the production of the antiplatelet antibody. So if we collect a pool of plasma from 60,000 healthy people who don't have ITP, you would expect these regulatory antibodies to be present in the pool, and they are. And so if you give IGIV to a patient with ITP, you'll see their platelet count rise 100% of the time. We actually have a label claim of 100% efficacy in raising platelet counts in ITP, 62% first dose efficacy, because of the presence of these regulatory anti-erythrocytic antibodies. Well, earlier, you got a question in stem cell transplantation. Physicians are using IGIV for the prevention of graft versus host disease. What they're trying to do is to shut off immune responses by the donated T lymphocytes, making use of anti-erythrocytic capacity of IGIV. And there's some hint that it works. It seems to work pretty well. Now, whether that's exactly the explanation, the mechanism, I'm not quite sure, but it is used in that regard. Regulatory secondary anti-erythrocytic antibodies. Any other questions? The fourth labeled indication for IGIV is in Kawasaki syndrome, which is a vasculitis, an inflammation of the blood vessels. We have a license for treatment of pediatric vasculitis. This may also occur in adults. The treatment for pediatric Kawasaki syndrome is obligatory IGIV plus aspirin. We give IGIV plus aspirin, generally a large dose of IGIV, 1 gram of IGIV per kilogram body weight, and 1 dose is all it takes. Kids do fine, and Kawasaki syndrome goes away and they're never trouble with it. 4 labeled indications for IGIV. Now, as I've already mentioned, there's a tremendous shortage of IGIV in North America, and that's for 2 reasons. If you can make a very prompt diagnosis of this child, very early on in life, first month or first couple of months of life, you can perform a stem cell transplant or a bone marrow transplant and completely reverse the skin, give the child a normal, active, healthy life. But if more than a month or 2 goes by, if this child has immune deficiency, their body will become colonized with bacteria and virus, and then it's too late to perform the stem cell transplant, and all you're left with is intravenous immunoglobulin as a preventive therapy. Warning signs of immune deficiency are obviously infection, failure to thrive, infection. The child is born and has ear infection a month, has meningitis 6 times in the first year of life, becomes septicemic, is afflicted with boils and skin rashes. A physician and a parent should suspect immune deficiencies in play. And the earlier the diagnosis is made, the sooner the child can be placed on intravenous immunoglobulin, the better off everybody will be. Because in children who lack just the B lymphocyte, IGIV therapy allows these kids to remain symptom-free. They have a very smooth course in life. They have no restrictions. The slide says this is similar to a well-controlled diabetic on insulin, but I'd argue with that. And that insulin is taken once or twice a day. IGIV is generally taken at a dose of 400 milligrams per kilogram once a month for children with primary immune deficiency. So while the effects may be the same as insulin, the dosage is much less frequent. But keep in mind, kids who lack both the T lymphocyte and B lymphocyte arm of immunity are going to have a fairly rocky course with a downhill course, as it says.